Atomic Habits by James Clear is by far the best book I have read on habits and how you can change them. The concepts outlined in the book, as well as James's blog, have allowed me to change many aspects of my own life and build better habits in the process. James Clear is an expert on habits, and he can help you build good habits and break bad ones. So here's my take on his top 10 rules for habit change. Okay, so let's kick it off with the first rule, which is to think in systems, not goals.
This is coming from someone who's been very goal-oriented for a long time. So I would set goals for the grades I wanted to get in school, or the weights I wanted to lift in the gym, or the amount of revenue I wanted in my business, or how many email subscribers I wanted, like all of that. And at some point I realized, I'm setting all these goals, like, am I actually achieving some of them? And sometimes I would, but there were plenty of times where I failed. And so I had this realization that, well, if that's the case, then setting a goal cannot be the thing that means whether or not I achieve success. And if you think about this, the winners and losers in any domain, a lot of the time they have the same goals. Like every person who applies for a job has the goal of getting the job. Every Olympian has the goal of winning the gold medal. And so if winners and losers have the same goals, then the goal can't be the thing that makes the difference. And I don't mean that goals are useless. I think goals are actually quite useful for setting a sense of direction, or knowing, what area the boat should be pointed in, what direction the boat should be pointed in, and where you're trying to row. But once you've decided that, it's probably more useful to put the goal on the shelf and focus exclusively on the system or the process. And in my language, habits make up the system. And they're like this collection of behaviors and patterns that you perform each day. And when you put them all together, you end up with this system that delivers a result. And whatever your results are in life or in business or wherever, your current system is perfectly designed to deliver them. It has to be, by definition. That's why you're getting those results. So if you want different results, what you need is not really a different goal. What you need is a different system.
Rule number 2 is to design your environment for success.
Well, anytime the environment changes in a big way, behavior changes in a big way. And many of us throughout the pandemic have felt or seen our environment change in really meaningful ways. It used to be that you went into the office, but now your office is the kitchen table, or the pantry used to be miles away from you most of the day, but now it's right around the corner and you can snack whenever you want. And so those shifts in environment have definitely led to a shift in behaviors, a creation of new habits. Now, not necessarily all good habits, but it's definitely been a shift. I do think, however, we can ask ourselves, what is one of the things that I like to come back to when we talk about designing habits is, what is the path of least resistance? So how can I make the good habits the obvious and easy thing to do in this environment? And when we all have our environment shift and we're working from home and different things are happening, you're in an environment that you probably have not optimized before, at least not for the certain set of habits that are being performed in it now. So I'll give a couple personal examples. I knew I'd be spending more time at home during quarantine and the pandemic and so on. And I figured, well, I'd like to use at least some of that time productively. So I want to read a little bit more. So I bought some books off my reading list. I have like 4 or 5 of them next to me right now on the desk. I put a couple down on the coffee table, 1 or 2 next to my bed. So I kind of am sprinkling books throughout the house so that it's the path of least resistance to read them. I also took all of the apps that are on the home screen of my phone, and I moved those to a second screen. And then I took Audible and I put that on the home screen right in the home bar. So it was the first thing that I would see when I would open up my phone, just to remind me to listen to another audiobook. And so what I'm trying to do is to prime my environment for more productive action, right? To make the good habit the path of least resistance. And what you often see, if you look around people's environments, we have, people can have good intentions. We can have all kinds of things that we would like to do, but the habits that we often actually spend time on are often the path of least resistance. Like if you take, a lot of people feel like they watch too much TV, or they watch more Netflix than they would like, or whatever. But if you walk into any living room, where do all the couches and chairs face, right? So it's like, what is this room designed to get you to do? And I'm not saying that you have to, get rid of your television or something, but you could place it inside a cabinet or a wall unit so that it's behind doors. You're less likely to see it. You could take the chair that you usually sit in to watch television. You could turn it and have it face a coffee table with a book on it. You could take the remote control, put it inside a drawer, put a book in its place. And, no single choice like that is going to radically transform your behavior. But you can imagine the impact of making a dozen or 2 dozen or 50 little choices like that throughout your environment that all kind of prime the more productive action. And suddenly it becomes a lot easier to stick to good habits when they're the path of least resistance. The more friction there is between you and a bad habit or an undesirable behavior, the less likely you are to do it. So if the food that you want to avoid, the junk food that you're trying to not eat, if it's, 15 minutes away at the store, that's a lot of friction. If it's in the house, that's much less friction, but it's better if it's on the highest shelf in the pantry or tucked away at the bottom of the fridge or, down in the basement in the cellar or something like these, anywhere where you can add more friction, make it less visible, make it less obvious, increase the number of steps between you and the behavior like you did when you unplugged the television. That's just a little bit of extra friction, and all of that stuff adds up. And is helpful in kind of guiding your behavior towards the path of least resistance.
Rule number 3 is not to quit too early because habits take time to create.
So 21 days is the thing you hear all the time, 30 days, 100 days, whatever. Right now, 66 days is making the rounds, is the latest.
I saw that in another book. What was that book?
Well, there was one study done that found that 66 days was the average for how long it takes. And as a rule of thumb, I don't think it's terrible. Like, you should remind yourself, this is going to be months of work. It's not just going to be something quick. But even within that study, the range was quite wide. So if you did something simple, like drink a glass of water at lunch each day, it would take like 3 weeks. If you did something more difficult, like go for a run after work every day, that would be like 7 or 8 months. But I think actually that question to begin with is sort of there's like a broken mentality behind it.
The wrong question.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Because if you ask that question, the implicit assumption is, when do I have to stop working? Or when is this done?
And is it automatic after a certain period of time?
Well, the honest answer to how long it takes to build a new habit is forever, because if you stop, then it's no longer a habit.
It's a constant choice and a decision, right?
I think people often look at habits as like a finish line to be crossed, but it's actually a lifestyle to be lived. And if you look at it as a lifestyle change, then you're saying, okay, what's something small and sustainable I can stick to, right? What's something that can actually last over time? So it is true that, and you can actually map this through research, that a habit will become more automatic with practice. But this reveals another important point, which is that there's nothing about the amount of time elapsed that leads to habits being built. You could practice something once in 30 days, or you could practice it 1,000 times. What actually leads to a habit becoming automatic and becoming learned and ingrained is repetition. So the phrase that I like to use is not 21 days to 30 days, but put in your reps. I mean, that's the real thing, is you need to practice. And if you put in your reps, then your brain starts to automate how that process works.
Yeah.
Rule number 4 is that any habits that you create and any actions that you take reinforce your identity.
Now, I'd like to close by talking about why habits are so important. And to do that, I want to share a little story about the ship of Theseus, which is this ancient Greek parable story about this ship that goes into Athens, Greece, and parks in the dock. And as it's there, it's used year after year. Some of the boards start to wear away. Some of them start to go bad. And so whenever one board is bad, they take the board out and change it and put a new one in. And this process continues for 25 or 30 years until every board that is on the ship has been changed out for a new one. And philosophers for centuries have asked, is this the same boat? Is this the same thing that was there before? Is both entirely the same and entirely new? And I would say that your habits can be the same way. We often fear that in order to achieve something new, to become someone new, we have to abandon everything that we are. But in fact, that's not how it works. Change can happen plank by plank, board by board, habit by habit. And gradually, you can become someone new. With consistency and repetition, you can actually change not only your results, but actually your identity. And the reason that this is true is because the more evidence that we have for a belief, the more likely we are to believe it. So if you go to church every Sunday for 20 years, you believe that you are religious. If you study Spanish every Thursday night for 20 minutes, you believe that you are studious. The actions that you take provide evidence for who you are. And it's not that habits matter more necessarily on an individual basis. Each moment in life matters. But what ends up happening is that over the broad span of time, things that you do once or twice fade away, and things that you do time after time, day after day, week after week, accumulate the bulk of the evidence for what you believe about yourself. And so every action that you take is actually a vote for the type of person that you want to become. If you want to become someone new, then you can take a new action and begin to accumulate evidence for that identity, for that belief about yourself. And that the more votes that you cast, the more likely you are to win the election. You don't need to be unanimous. You don't have to be perfect all the time. You just need to have the body of work, right? So true change is actually not behavior change. It's not results change. It's not process change. It's identity change. The goal is not to read a book. It's to become a reader. The goal is not to write a book or write an article. It's to become a writer. The goal is not to run a marathon. It's to become a runner, to become a type of person, to develop an identity. And the way to being something or becoming someone is through doing something. So every time you sit down to write, every time you practice that habit, you are being a writer. Every time you play a sport, you're being an athlete. Every time you practice painting or music or whatever, you are being an artist. Your identity emerges out of the habits that you have. And so here's the secret to this talk. It's not just about getting you to make small changes. It's not just about putting a book on your pillow or putting an apple on the counter. It's actually about getting you to believe something new about yourself, something possible about yourself. And habits are not only the method through which we achieve external measures of success, like losing weight or earning more money or meditating and reducing stress. They are also the path through which we achieve internal change and actually become someone new. They're the path through which we forge the identity that we have, the deepest beliefs we have about ourselves, our sense of self. And so if you can change your habits, you can change your life.
Rule number 5 is the importance of keystone habits.
What you're describing is sometimes called a keystone habit. And the idea is you do one thing and it like ripples into other areas of your life. And so for me, it's exercise. Like if I go to the gym, then I get the benefits of exercise, but I also tend to eat better. For some reason, I just don't want to waste it. I also focus more. So I have sort of that like post-workout high after I work out. And then I sleep better because I'm tired from the workout, which means I wake up the next morning and I have better energy. And at no point was I trying to build better sleep habits or energy habits or focus habits or nutrition habits, but all that kind of just came as a side effect of doing this one thing of going to the gym. Some other common keystone habits are budgeting. Sometimes people say when they pay off debt, they'll like start to get in shape, or they they're more social and have better relationships, or like there's all kinds of things that kind of come out of that. Going for a daily walk is a really big one. It's a very common one among creators in particular. There's a book called Daily Rituals by Mason Curie. And he basically just writes down like what, I don't know, it's 100 or 150 famous like creators and scientists and whatever, what their daily routines were. And a lot of them were raging alcoholics and on amphetamines and all kinds of other stuff. But the ones who were more healthy, a daily habit like walking was a really big part of their routine. Visualization is a big one, especially for performers like a comedian or something. They'll often visualize the same kind of result, or professional athletes before they step out on the stage or step out on the court. And then another one is meditation. And this one you hear a lot with like CEOs and leaders. If they get like their 10 minutes of meditation in the morning, the rest of the day just kind of goes more smoothly. So that's the first way to answer that question, is with a keystone habit. The second way is through what I call a decisive moment. And basically there are these little moments throughout the day. Well, depending on what research study you look at, habits account for 40 to 50% of our daily behaviors. And this is all the stuff that you're just doing without even thinking, tying your shoes or unplugging the toaster after each time you use it or whatever. But the true influence of your habits is even greater than that, because in many ways, habits are kind of like a fork in the road. They're like an entrance ramp on the highway. So you do something mindlessly, like you pull your phone out of your pocket and you don't even think about it. It takes 5 seconds. But after you do that, it shapes the next like 20 minutes of conscious attention and choices that you're making. So maybe you browse social media, or you respond to email, or you play a video game. But whatever choice you're making, it was already the context was already shaped by that mindless habit of pulling your phone out. And so I would refer to that as like a decisive moment. They're these little automatic actions that you do them, and then after 30 seconds, they've already shaped the next 20 minutes or the next chunk of time that's going to come. So in my personal life, like there's a moment around 5:15 each night. My wife gets home from work, and either we change into our workout clothes and we go to the gym, or we don't change into our workout clothes and we watch, reruns of The Office and order takeout or whatever. And really the next 2 hours are kind of determined by that decisive moment of whether we change into our workout clothes or not. If we change clothes, then like everything else is going to happen automatically. We're going to drive to the gym. I'll get under the bar. It's already pre-decided basically. So one of the realizations of this, and it comes back to your kind of central question of what are the most important habits to build, or are there ones that ripple into other areas of life? If you can just master maybe 5 or 10 decisive moments throughout the day, these little kind of 2-minute chunks that determine the next block of time, you really only have to focus your attention and energy on that. And the rest of it kind of comes easily. You don't have to do that much if you can master the right moments. It's kind of like judo for your personal habits. You apply the pressure in the right place and everything else kind of falls in line.
Rule number 6 is that tiny gains lead to big results.
I'd like to start with a story. And the story is about Team Sky, which is Great Britain's professional cycling team. Sometime in the mid-2000s, around 2010, they hired a man named Dave Brailsford. And at the time, Team Sky had a very middle-of-the-road record when it came to performance on the world stage. They had won about 1 gold medal in the last 100 years, from 1908 to 2008. They had never won a Tour de France, the premier event in cycling. And when they hired Dave Brailsford, they said, we would like to change this. We'd like to improve our performance. We'd like to reach a higher level of performance. What's your plan to help us do that? And when they hired Brailsford, he said, I have this strategy called the aggregation of marginal gains. And the way that he described it was the 1% improvement in nearly everything that you do. And so they started by looking at a lot of things you would expect a cycling team to look at. They improved their bike tires and made them slightly lighter. They put a more ergonomic seat on the bike. They had their riders wear biofeedback sensors so they could see how each person responded to the training and practice that they did each day. They had their outdoor riders wear indoor racing suits because they were lighter and more aerodynamic. But then they did a variety of things that you wouldn't expect a cycling team to do. They split tested different types of massage gels to see which one led to the best form of recovery. They taught their riders how to wash their hands to reduce the risk of infection and keep them healthy. They even figured out what kind of pillow led to the best night's sleep for each rider and then brought that on the road with them to hotels. So Brailsford said, if we can actually execute on this strategy, if we can aggregate all these small changes, these little 1% improvements, then I think we can win the Tour de France in about 5 years. He ended up being wrong. They won the Tour de France in 3 years. And then they repeated again in the 4th year with a different rider. And then just last year, they won for the 3rd time in 4 years. And Brailsford's strategy really came to fruition at the Olympics in London in 2012, when they won 70% of the gold medals available. And so what I'd like to start us off with is the idea that small improvements actually can add up to a very significant change in a relatively short period of time. And this is just basic math, all right? If you get 1% better each day over 365 days, you end up 37 times better at the end of the year. If you get 1% worse, you take yourself almost all the way down to 0. And this idea that 1% improvements are not just nice to have or not just a nice little bonus, but actually something significant that adds up to a very substantial increase in the long run is the place that I'd like to start us at today. Now, you might say, okay, well, 1% improvements are nice, but clearly no one is going to get 1% better every single day. So is that ever enough to accumulate to anything, considering that we're not going to be perfect all the time? And I would argue, yes. In fact, you can get 10 times better if you get 1% better 5 days a week, 46 weeks a year, so it's about 230 days in total. That gives you 6 weeks off for holidays, illness, laziness, and just generally not getting things done. But you're still 10 times better at the end of the year. And what I would like to propose is that the way to do this is not by setting better goals for ourselves or at our organizations, but by building better systems and obtaining better habits.
Rule number 7 is to delay gratification to build good habits.
And habits are a lot like that. They're not exactly like compound interest, where you kind of like hit that hockey stick portion of the curve, but they really feel like that a lot. Like we were saying just a few moments ago, it feels insignificant on any day, but then you turn around 10 years later and it's actually, you're surprised by where you end up. And that's a hallmark of any compounding process, that the greatest returns are delayed. And so habits are like that too. They don't feel like much on any given day, but they really add up over the months and years.
And most of us overestimate the significance of the short-term stuff, and we underestimate the potential of the long term, right? Is that just another cognitive bias?
Yeah, I don't know why we do that, but we do tend to feel like, we overestimate what we get done in a day, underestimate in a year or a decade.
Do you think it's because we used to have shorter lifespans where maybe this stuff didn't play out? I mean, because this got us somewhere, we evolved to this point.
Well, so we do have, and this definitely plays an important role in habits, we do have a bias toward the present. And that makes sense, right? That example I gave about like finding a berry bush, 100 meters away. Well, you should, in fact, go get the food that's close by and not the food that's on the other side of the mountain, because that just makes logical sense. You'd rather have it now, especially when we were not in modern society, right? For 99.999% of human history, we're just trying to survive like every other animal. And so you should prioritize immediate food, immediate shelter, immediate water, immediate safety. And in fact, our brains are wired to do that. But modern society is a whole different ballgame because we have all these things that actually you should prioritize delayed outcomes. So you go to college now and then you graduate in 4 years. You save for retirement today and then you retire decades from now. You show up at work this week and then you get a paycheck in a month. And so it's actually like there are all kinds of things we do in modern society that require you to delay gratification. And that runs a little counter to what our wiring is or what our biological preference is.
Right. I just thought of the term like caveman. Whenever someone talks like a caveman doing something, it's like the caveman's just thinking like, okay, immediate gratification. What do I got to do now to survive? Mm-hmm. And we've now pretty much reverse engineered all of that stuff out.
Yeah. It makes sense that our brain is like that, but we just are kind of in a mismatched environment a little bit. And so to bring this back to habits, there's a sort of a misalignment of rewards that often happens with habits. So there's an immediate outcome, an immediate reward, and then an ultimate reward. And for your bad habits, one reason bad habits stick so readily, that they form so easily, is because bad habits, often the immediate reward is favorable, right? Like what's the immediate reward of eating a donut? It's kind of great. It's sweet, it's sugary, it tastes good. It's only the ultimate reward, if you repeat that habit for 6 months or a year or 2 years, that is unfavorable. Meanwhile, good habits are often the exact opposite. The immediate reward of going to the gym or going to the gym for like a week isn't really that great. Your body's probably sore. You don't have much to show for it. Your body looks the same. Your weight hasn't really changed. But if you stick to that for 6 months or a year or 2 years, then the ultimate reward is favorable. And so a lot of the balance or a lot of the challenge of building good habits and breaking bad ones is figuring out how to pull the long-term costs of your bad habits into the present moment. So you feel a little bit of that pain right now and have a reason to avoid it. And pull the long-term rewards of your good habits into the present moment so it feels good. And you have a reason to kind of make it through that like valley of death in the beginning and stick with it while you're waiting for those delayed rewards to accumulate. I think we could just summarize that whole cognitive bias or misalignment of rewards by saying the cost of your good habits is in the present and the cost of your bad habits is in the future. And the fact that we prioritize the present over the future ends up making a lot of habit change difficult for that reason.
Okay, so rule number 8 is the power of accountability and not doing it alone.
I talk about accountability and coaches all the time. I hire coaches for everything because I use sports as my life, an analogy for my life. And I know that I couldn't have gotten to where I wanted to be as an athlete without great coaches and accountability.
Yep.
So how important is accountability towards habits as well?
Yeah, it's huge. So I recently hired a powerlifting coach. He's great. He's worked with like 12 world champions. And having him has, he's not based in Columbus actually, but Columbus is great for strength culture.
Yeah.
It's, obviously there's the Arnold, but then Westside Barbell and a bunch of other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's awesome. But your point about coaches is a crucial one, which is that having a coach forces you to be aware of things that you would otherwise overlook, right? Like this is what I call the downside of building good habits, which is you build habits and in the beginning you develop fluency and skill and ability and things become easier. But after a little while, once a habit has been established, the downside of having a habit is that you can do it good enough on autopilot, which means that you start to overlook your mistakes and not think about how to get better.
Yeah.
And so what you need is a coach to keep you on that razor's edge so that you keep building habits, but it also forces you to stay aware of what the next level of performance is. And that's kind of the challenge of continuous improvement. It's like a cycle. You know, it starts with awareness. If you're not aware of what your habits are or what your behavior is, you don't have a chance to change it. Then from that awareness, you go to deliberate practice, where you have to effortfully try and work to get better. And eventually, the thing that you were deliberately practicing becomes a habit and becomes automatic. But once it becomes automatic, that's not the end. You have to return to awareness and see where you're at now,
how to
and
get
start
to
the
next
cycle
level,
again.
Huh. And what if you can't afford a coach? How do you find the right accountability partner?
That's where I think we come back to the social component that we talked about earlier.
Join the group, join the community.
That's probably the best way to do it. And the great thing about the internet and the web is that you can find those people before where you couldn't find them previously. You know, it used to be that you had to hope that the people in your local community or on your sports team or at your organization were also interested in the same things. And now you can find those people in 5 minutes online.
Rule number 9 is to focus on one habit at a time.
And I think from what I've heard about building habits too, it's usually a fool's attempt to try to build 10 habits, 15 habits at once. And I've certainly tried to do that where I'm like, you know what? No, this time it's going to happen. Like I'm going to plan out the next 30 days and I'm going to read every day. I'm going to start exercising every day. I'm going to start doing all this. And then what happens, like 7 days, 8 days in, everything just starts dropping by the wayside. And 3 months later, I look back at this journal that's empty, just depressed. So is there something to building slowly? And would you just like recommend one at a time?
Depends on which expert you talk to. Some people think, oh, if you do 2 or 3 and they're really small, then that can be good because you're kind of like developing the skill of building a little habit. Personally, I only do 1 at a time, and I think that that's a better approach. The other reason that I recommend that is that what really changes your outcomes or what really moves your life in a positive direction is not a single like 1% change or a single little habit. It's a collection of them all organized towards the same like overall goal or overall outcome. So, sometimes people they get like a Fitbit and they get a Fitbit and they start walking 10,000 steps a day or something like that. And then they get frustrated after 3 months because they haven't seen this change in the mirror or this change on the scale or whatever. But it's like, well, that's good, but that's just one habit related to your health. You don't need a single little habit. You need like 1,000 of them. And once you kind of build this collection of them all moving you in the same direction, it's kind of like each one adds a little grain of sand to the side of the scale, and eventually you tip the scales in your favor. And I think that's another reason to start with one habit at a time, is that you naturally sort of pick up other behaviors that are related to the overall thing that you're working on in the moment. And that helps keep you focused rather than trying to do 2 or 3 things and then you get scattered. But there's another way to answer this question, which is probably one of the most common questions I get is how long does it take to build a habit? And people were like, oh, I think, I've heard it takes 21 days or it takes 30 days. Or there was one research study that said 66 days on average. So that number's floating around a lot now. But that study, the range was quite wide. So, depending on the habit you're building, if you wanted something simple like drinking a glass of water at lunch, that would take a few weeks. If you wanted something more complicated like going for a run after work, that would take 7 or 8 months. But even that, that question, how long does it take to build a habit? It sort of implicitly has the wrong approach, which is, oh, this is just like a finish line for me to cross. It's basically the implicit assumption behind that question is how long do I have to work before this is done? And the honest answer to how long does it take to build a better habit or build a new habit is forever, because if you stop doing it, it's no longer a habit, right? So, I think the point here is that habits are not a finish line to cross. They're a lifestyle to live. And so if you can adopt that philosophy, then it helps to change your approach a little bit. Like you talk about, oh, should I do it? This is going to be different this time. I'll work really hard for 30 days. I'll do these 10 or 15 things. But no, just start with something really small, 1% change, a lifestyle change that you can sustain. Because if you're going to do something forever, if it's going to become part of your lifestyle, you want it to be moderate enough that you can actually stick to it. You can ask yourself the question like, can I stick to this habit 98% of the time, no matter what the circumstances? And if you can't, then it's probably too big. Scale it down in some way.
At number 10, we have the 2-minute rule.
All right, let's talk about other ways to make building new habits easier. I think David Allen spoke at Stretch last year or 2 years ago, and he has a concept that he calls the 2-minute rule. And the way that he describes it is the 2-minute rule is anything that takes less than 2 minutes, you should do it right away. So making a phone call back that you've been putting off, sending that email that you've been avoiding, throwing the laundry in, washing the dishes, whatever it is, if it takes less than 2 minutes, just do it right away. Take out the trash and so on. Now, I think we can adapt that rule for habits and behavior change. There is no habit that we're going to work on that takes less than 2 minutes to do. But nearly any habit can be started in under 2 minutes. So if you take exercise, for example, often people will get home from a long day of work and they say, oh, I'm too exhausted to go for a run or to try to exercise. So I never get around to doing it because I think about, oh, I have to run, 5 kilometers or whatever, some long distance that seems overwhelming to me. So rather than focus on the whole thing that you need to do, I would encourage you to focus on just the first 2 minutes. So what's the first 2 minutes of that habit? I put my running shoes on, I get out the door, and I lock the door. And if you do just that, it doesn't matter if you take another step. But what you find is that motivation often comes after starting, not before. We often think that motivation is something that we're supposed to have before we do work. But motivation will come as a result of doing some small bit of work, and then we can trust that the rest of the process will flow easily. Another way that we could put it is that you basically start with this 3-step process. Start with a habit that is incredibly easy for you, so small that you can't say no to it. Then increase your habit, but in a very small way. And third, keep it easy and break down the habit as needed. This also is from BJ Fogg. His program, Tiny Habits, is free, I believe, if you want to check it out. I think it's pretty good. It does a good job of breaking down some of these behavior change principles. But the point here is that the motivation needed to complete a habit is at its peak at the beginning of a behavior. The greatest amount of friction for any type of task is in the beginning, is in the starting. But as soon as you start the habit, it's so much easier to follow through. Let's take that running example that I was just giving. How hard is it to start running when you haven't started at all, compared to after you've already run 3 kilometers and you're running 5 in total? Well, once you're halfway there, you're like, I might as well run back. I got to go back anyway, right? You need almost no motivation to finish the task once it's begun. So the point here is that by reducing the amount of friction in the beginning of the behavior with the 2-minute rule, you make it more likely that you'll actually follow through with the whole thing in the long run. So the key idea is make it so easy that you can't say no.
Alright guys, that is all for this video. Those are James Clear's 10 rules for habit change. If you enjoyed this video, then don't forget to leave a comment down below and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. That's all. Take care. Bye bye.